Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Letitia Obeng, and I'm the chair of the Supervisory Board of WIN. Welcome to this webinar on Water Integrity Global Outlook 2024. This is our third report, and the subject is Improving Integrity in Water and Sanitation Finance. Such an important subject. Integrity failures result in the loss of funds that could be used to provide sustainable water supply and sanitation services to all. The report helps us to understand the integrity challenges of financing in the water and sanitation sector and looks, among other things, into how integrity influences financing, addresses ways to tackle corruption and therefore improve integrity, and provides recommendations for water supply and sanitation actors to help improve integrity in financing. We have what I hope will be a very interesting agenda for you. So to our program. We will begin with a keynote speech, followed by the presentation of the report, and we will end with a panel discussion and what everybody always wants, a Q&A session. An important note for us all, please ask your questions in the Q&A facility. The team will answer as many as possible during the session, either in writing or verbally as the occasion arises. So let me introduce our first two speakers. Our keynote speech title on fighting corruption, especially in finance, and the implications not only for improved service delivery, but for stability, development, democracy, the role of civil society, civic space, and organizations like OGP. And our speaker is Sanjay Pradhan. Sanjay serves as the CEO of the OGP, the Open Government Partnership. He is a world-renowned, tireless champion of good governance and fighting corruption. For those who don't know, OGP is a partnership of 76 countries and 106 local governments, together representing more than 2 billion people, along with thousands of civil society organizations, all working together to make governments more transparent, participatory, and responsive to citizens, and less corrupt. Unfortunately, Sanjay is unable to be with us today due to a bereavement, but he has very kindly sent us a video presentation instead. The report will then be presented by Barbara Schreiner. Barbara is our executive director in WIN. Barbara has 3 decades of experience in water management in developing countries with a focus on good governance and addressing poverty, inequality, gender, and other forms of social and economic marginalization. She's also currently a member of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Committee, providing advice to the President of South Africa. So let us begin with the video presentation by Sanjay. Thank you.
Hello, friends and partners from the water and sanitation sector. It is a pleasure to join you at this launch today. The WIGO report resonated very strongly with me. So let me reinforce and complement those findings from the perspective of the Open Government Partnership, or OGP, that I lead as CEO and where Barbara Schreiner serves as a valued steering committee member. The WIGO report focuses on integrity in financing. It is but natural for sector professionals to ask, why should we wade into anti-corruption and integrity in financing when our focus is on water and sanitation outcomes? Our concern is with water and sanitation. To explain why, let me share a little story. In the late 1980s, I was working in the World Bank on Uganda, where our main concern was the appalling health and education outcomes of Ugandans who had suffered from a devastating civil war. Poor and young Ugandans desperately needed textbooks and medicines. I worked tirelessly on a major $100 million World Bank grant to finance these services. But after the money was disbursed and I traveled to rural areas, I found that schools still didn't have the textbooks and health clinics did not have the medical supplies. We tracked the expenditures and we found that 80% of the financing had leaked. The WIGO report cites that corruption and leakages waste up to 26% of the money invested in the water sector. So if, as we all care about water and sanitation outcomes, we cannot imperative of focusing on corruption and leakages. And for this, open government approaches can help. To explain what I mean by this, let me take you back to Uganda. To tackle that 80% leakage problem, government reformers started transparently disseminating on local newspapers, school billboards, and community radio how much money each school was supposed to receive. Armed with this information, parents and civil society started demanding, where is the money? And guess what? Over time, the leakage shrank from 80% to 20%. To take you fast forward to a more recent example from our partnership OGP, in Kaduna, Nigeria, an audit revealed that a health clinic paid by the budget only existed on paper, a ghost clinic. To tackle this, the budget director created a mobile app where residents could download the geolocation of publicly financed projects and upload photos and feedback on these projects, which went directly to the governor's office and the state legislature for corrective action. In 2 years, this resulted in a record completion of roads and health clinics. These examples underscore that open government approaches can tackle corruption and leakages, and these open government approaches can consist of two elements. First, transparency and disclosure by the government of the financing, and second, an engaged citizenry demands accountability and provides feedback which government reformers respond to. These elements of the open government approach map nicely onto the pathways that the WIGO report mentions. Transparency advances the no room incentive pathway of the WIGO report. Public accountability advances the no reprieve pathway of the WIGO report. And for all this, we need to foster a culture, a new culture of integrity, openness, and service, which advances the no reason pathway of the WIGO report. Now, over the last 13 years, government reformers and civil society activists have advanced ambitious open government reforms across our 76-country partnership. In the water and sanitation sector, 31 OGP countries and 15 local OGP members have undertaken commitments, OGP commitments in water and sanitation, ranging from, again, transparency through digital mapping of clean water, water access points in La Libertad, Peru, and disclosure of water quality in Seoul, Korea, to participatory national water planning with 2,000 stakeholders in Uruguay and citizen monitoring of the Water for All program in Brazil. Now, we can apply these open government approaches of government transparency and public participation and oversight along the entire value chain of financing in water and sanitation. in order to tackle corruption. This was the approach to tackling corruption across all sectors that my colleague, the late Ed Campos, and I advocated in a book we published some years ago called The Many Faces of Corruption. So we can look at and track corruption, tackling corruption along the value chain from upstream decision-making and public contracting to downstream service delivery, which is what the WIGO report also does. So turning first to downstream corruption. In downstream corruption, people, especially the poor, have to pay bribes to access water and sanitation services. To tackle similar challenges across sectors, Panama, through OGP, set up a 311 hotline through which citizens could report problems with corruption and service delivery. You know, in 2018, citizens reported over 1 million such complaints through phone calls and mobile app messages. And the government responded to and resolved over 90% of them online. In the water and sanitation sector in Mongolia, the Check My Services initiative teaches community groups to provide feedback on public services and constructively engage with government for corrective action. This resulted in over 40,000 citizen report cards, which led to improvements in waste disposal and water supply. Turning to upstream decision-making, there are considerable opportunities for corruption in the award of procurement contracts, for instance, for costly water treatment plants, which open government approaches can help tackle. So, for instance, in Ukraine in 2014, to tackle the capture of public procurement by powerful oligarchs, reformers disclosed previously opaque contracts online for public oversight and corrective action. You know, this resulted in the government saving $6 billion over 4 years, as documented in a recent BBC article, and 80% of businesses surveyed by USAID reported reduced corruption. In the water and sanitation sector in Mongolia in 2017, the resource contracting database disclosed over 70 water use contracts for public oversight and accountability. So there's tremendous scope for scaling up such ambitious open government reforms in water and sanitation. But for this, the water and sanitation community and the open government community must forge stronger partnerships where they have been typically operating in parallel silos. I invite you all to leverage and use the OGP platform to integrate ambitious open government reforms in water and sanitation through OGP country action plans. So in closing, we must tackle corruption in water and sanitation to improve service delivery for people. But there is a broader imperative as well. As public services have failed to reach people in water and sanitation and other sectors as well because of corruption and leakages, citizen trust in government has plummeted to an all-time low, according to the Edelman Barometer. Populist leaders have stoked this citizen distrust to get elected and then attack democratic institutions. So we must tackle corruption and leakages in key sectors like water and sanitation to build citizen trust and renew democracy. And this is, of course, essential for ensuring that the corrupt don't steal away people's basic human right to water and sanitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Sanjay for that keynote address and for setting a broad context for us and a real call to action around corruption and the human right to water and sanitation within the context of of protecting and building democracy as well. And also thanks to Sanjay for some really positive examples of just how you can actually make a difference. And I think that links very well to this WeGo, because one of the things about WeGo is putting practical actions on the table that can be taken to make a difference. We know that corruption is widespread, but there is stuff that can be done, whether it's at the sectoral level or at the institutional level, or whatever. So I am now going to take you through the report. I've got 15 minutes in which to take you through a 150-page report. So what you're getting is the tasting menu. I'm hoping that it will be enough to give you a flavor, and that you will go where, if you haven't already read it in detail, that you will actually read it or pick out the bits that are particularly relevant to you. The point of this is not to produce a report. The point of this is to put on the table some information that people can then use to actually change the way that things are done. So this report, next slide, please, Claire. Is intended to highlight some integrity issues that jeopardize the sector finance, increase the funding gap, and compromise sustainability in the sector. We, as I said, provide examples and recommendations for action, whether by governments, by utilities, by regulators, funders, civil society organizations. So it's very practical. This is not an academic report. This is very practical, giving suggestions for action. And the recommendations that I will come back to in due course fall under three headings: improving public finance management, enabling stakeholder engagement, and building a culture of integrity. And I think you already heard Sanjay talking about the need for both social accountability and for building that stakeholder accountability. Claire, can you put it into display mode, please? So the report sets the framework, looking at three key global trends within which we have to look at water sector financing, and these are three that we think are particularly appropriate. The first is climate change adaptation. We can't have any conversation in 2024 without referring to climate change, and in the water and sanitation sector, adaptation particularly. There is a rapidly growing need, but there are also major inflows of new funds through new processes, which need increased attention, tracking, and understanding of what finance is flowing where, and whether it's actually reaching and delivering on the purpose that it should be delivering on. The other is the closing of civic space, and you heard Sanjay to refer to that already. We are globally seeing a challenge with closing civic space, which impacts on financial transparency and the ability of water users, water and sanitation users, civil society and others to hold government accountable. And then we are seeing major digital development in all sorts of ways, including AI, but all sorts of digital development that brings both opportunities, but also different threats and different challenges in relation to corruption. So that is the context of the global trends within which this report is contextualized. But we can't, can you move on, Claire? We can't talk about water and sanitation financing without looking at what is it that we actually mean. What are we talking about in terms of the funding? What are the real sources of funding? And so there are obviously regional differences in terms of what the main source of funding is. Oceania, this is from the GLASS 2022 report. Oceania is about a bit of an outlier, but in relation to the global picture, 90% of the funding for the water and sanitation sector comes from tariffs and taxes. A small amount comes from transfers and from repayable finance. So if we really want to fix the holes in this leaking bucket where money leaks out through corruption and mismanagement and malfeasance, focusing on that 90% is a really significant thing that we need to do. But we also have to look at how much money we need to, in fact, be able to meet the challenges of the sector. Next slide, please, Claire. The World Bank figures are that we need an annual investment of 140 billion to meet the targets for WASH. That's said to be about 3 times what the current investment is. So if we look at the current investment, there is an investment, but we're already losing significant amounts of that due to corruption, integrity failures, and mismanagement. Sanjay referred to the figures that we have from Latin America of up to 26%. Very difficult to put a figure to corruption because it happens in the dark and shady corners. The IMF has put figures in the infrastructure sector globally of between 30 and 50% loss due to mismanagement. So chunks of money that are going out of the picture through the current investment. There's a huge funding gap. Obviously, within that funding gap, if we don't fix the holes in the leaking bucket, we're going to see the same losses coming out of anything that comes in to fix that funding gap. And the result of this is that we end up with people, particularly marginalized communities who have too much water, too little water, too dirty water, and very poor access to sanitation services. And within that, we've talked specifically about the losses through mismanagement and corruption, but there are other very significant losses that we need to examine. The one is that for developing country governments, the international tax regime is not friendly. A whole lot of money that should be paid to developing countries is not because of the international tax regime. The second is that through illicit financial flows, massive amounts of money are flowing out of developing countries, meaning that the tax amount that goes to water and sanitation is significantly reduced, both through the tax regime and through the illicit financial flows. But then we have another challenge, which is that, in fact, the sector is not spending the budgets that it does have. At the moment, according to the World Bank figures, we're talking about 78% expenditure of annual budgets in the water and sanitation sector. So there's a real need to build up the capacity to actually be able to spend money. If we're going to bring in 3 times what we currently have, we need to have the capacity to be able to spend it and spend it effectively. And so the report then looks at where the losses are in the budgeting cycle. Next slide, please. And we look, and I'm not going to go in this in detail because I only have 15 minutes, but we look in the report at some of the challenges in the planning and allocating of money right up front, because even in the planning, corruption can skew where the money goes and what it is invested in. There are corruption, mismanagement, malfeasance challenges in bringing in the money. There are then challenges in spending the money, and that's obviously often where the biggest challenges are looked at, particularly around procurement. And then there are significant challenges in accounting for the money, being able to track it. Where does it actually go? What is it actually spent on? And part of that, through this whole thing, there's the normal processes, and then there are the processes resulting from in disaster situations, which are particularly challenging. Next slide, please. The report then looks at 3 aspects of reducing the risk of corruption and building integrity in the water and sanitation sector. And again, you heard Sanjay refer to them. The first is building this around no reason. So this is about addressing the kind of mutual expectations and relationships, the social and organizational norms that are present that either support corrupt networks or actually disrupt corrupt networks. And it's often an area that is not sufficiently addressed, but it's really critical. And change can come through such things as ethical leadership, rewarding ethical behavior, or actual change management programs at the institutional or sectoral level. The second is no room, which is the more traditional structural or managerial interventions to reduce the space for those who are responsible for water and sanitation delivery to actually act corruptly. And this might see things like limiting the discretion of officials, closing loopholes in the legislation or regulations, the adoption of digital tools such as e-procurement, which has had some extraordinary impacts in various countries. And then the third has to be no reprieve, which is really about catching the bad guys and whacking them. Sending a very clear message that unethical or corrupt actions will not go unnoticed or unpunished, that impunity is not an option. And I think many of us know that there's a huge challenge in this, particularly in relation to holding higher level and key political people accountable for their actions. It's a significant challenge here. Let me just say that no reprieve, the whacking people for doing the thing wrong, will never get us out of corruption. We need to look at all three of those and work on all three aspects of this to really get an anti-corruption program that works. So next slide, please, Claire. Coming out of this, we make a series of recommendations around three headings. One is around building a culture of integrity. That thing that Sanjay referred to. The second is around enabling stakeholder involvement, and that refers to being able to bring stakeholders together, the social accountability aspects, all of those kind of things. And then the third is obviously strengthening public finance management. And again, none of these on their own is going to be a silver bullet. What I'm now going to do is take you through just a couple of examples that we have in the report. Obviously there's about 15 sort of headings of recommendations. I can't take you through all of them, but I'm going to take you through just a couple to give you that tasting menu that is going to tempt you to lie in bed sleepless at night reading this report. The first is around strengthening public financial management. Next slide, please, Claire. And around the need to ensure financial transparency. Not enough on its own, but an absolutely critical element of improving integrity in financing in the water and sanitation sector. And you will find in the report that there's discussion around this and suggestions. I've just picked out some of the actions that we recommend. So for utilities, make the financial data publicly available, preferably in machine-readable digital format, because that makes it easier for people to analyze it, but at the very minimum, in hard copy, so that users, other stakeholders can get hold of it and can examine it. Actions for civil society organizations, researchers, and the media. Advocate for right to information laws that meet international standards. Right to information laws are incredibly important. Connect with open government organizations to advocate for fiscal transparency, as Sanjay was suggesting. Work with other partners like open government organizations. And then analyze the information that is available, whether it's through utility websites, data platforms, or in fact through the Auditor General reports. Analyze the information and then act on what that analysis shows. Next slide, please. Then around enabling stakeholder strengthening public finance management, another key aspect, encourage and protect whistleblowers. A large amount of action on corruption arises originally from a whistleblower going, hey guys, something going on that shouldn't be going on. So every utility should have a whistleblowing policy and system that allows for safe and protected reporting of corruption in financial management, non-negotiable. Civil society should be advocating for whistleblower protections in all water and sanitation entities. Next one, please. Enabling stakeholder engagement. Empowered civil society, media, strengthening of social accountability, really important. For donors and international financial institutions, first of all, it's really critical that you promote and defend civic space, that you stand up and fight for the space in every way possible. The other thing that is important is that you fund and support social accountability initiatives, bottom-up accountability initiatives. For civil society organizations, researchers, and the media, again, advocate for fiscal transparency and open contracting. Organize and amplify residents' voices so that those voices are stronger and more powerful. But also build capacity at the grassroots level within civil society for being able to understand water and sanitation budgets and expenditure. Here's the budget, here's the expenditure. How do the two, they don't marry. What went wrong? And for people to be able to understand that and do that is incredibly important. Next slide, please. Building a culture of integrity. Very, very important. Influencing the social and institutional norms that are related to integrity. For ministries, for regulators, for utilities, One of the ways of doing this is introducing rewards for integrity actions. One of the most critical things is promoting staff who actually act with integrity. It is a signal to the entire organization that this is what matters to the organization and this is how you get recognized. Develop and lead an organizational culture change program focused on a culture change around integrity. Can have enormous impacts. Civil society organizations facilitate discussions on social norms that enable corruption and integrity failures and desirable or non-acceptable behaviors, and get that conversation going so that we can surface what the social norms are and begin to look at how to change them. So those are just, I don't have more time to go through anymore. Those are just some highlights of some of the recommendations that we make. There's much more in the report. So please do go and look at it. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I have to thank the people who put this together. This was a team, a massive teamwork. There were a lot of people who put a lot of energy and time into this. I have to thank David Shope-Jones and Alta Fulsho, who gave us the initial framing and a really superb draft from which we then worked. Thanks to all of the people that worked with them. Thanks very much to the WeGo Steering Committee who put their time and energy into this. To the team in WIN who put a massive amount of time and energy into it. To the Supervisory Board of WIN who took a look at the draft and made some very, very useful comments on it. To the WeGo Latin America team, there is, let me just say this, within the next couple of months, we will release a parallel WeGo with based on 3 case studies in Latin America. And thanks very much to the sector experts who put their time and energy into this. And if there's anybody who worked on it whose name I've forgotten, I deeply apologize, but it was a really massive piece of teamwork. And thank you very much to Mary Galvin, who spent many sleepless nights trying to pull this all together and put it into the shape that it is finally in. My last comment is to just quote, next slide, please, from Serene Malik, who says very clearly, WeGo makes a compelling case for the essential role of integrity in the financing of the water and sanitation sector. Shying away from integrity or failing to name it explicitly does not help our cause. Integrity and its principles and pathways for systemic change are not optional extras, but foundational elements that ensure the effective and equitable use of resources, ultimately leading to more successful and impactful projects. And on that note, thank you very much. And we have a little bit of time. Claire is operating as my timekeeper, and maybe she'll tell me how much time we have. I hope I haven't gone over time too much. To look at some questions. So I have some questions here. Integrity in water and I'm just trying to work out which are the questions and rather than comments. Would it not be a solution to focus more on facilitating market-based solutions and self-supply? In Indonesia, a middle-income country, only 9% of the 260 million people use piped water on a day-to-day basis. Is the piped network the right solution for the global south? Solar lamps have leapfrogged the need for electricity lines and reached millions of people. Perhaps we should look at different delivery models that look beyond the pipe. That is a massive question, and not one that WeGo is in a place to solve or for us to, I think, answer in this discussion. But we do deal with the issue of self-supply to some extent in the report. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that when you look at the financing of the water and sanitation sector, there is very little that actually distinguishes how much money is actually going in from users themselves into self-supply, as opposed to any other ways of financing. Then there's a question around practical approaches for dealing with corruption. I'm currently a member of an oversight committee for a rather large water reclamation project for indirect potable reuse. The oversight committee was tasked with writing a report on our opinion on the potential risks of the project, in which we have identified the need for transparency as one of the TAPA, which is transparency, accountability, participation, and anti-corruption principles to be considered for the project. As editing author, I added a status page to the document on which we indicated the status of the report is public and suitable for public distribution at the discretion of the project proponent. The project proponent wants us, the advisory committee, to change the status to project proponent only, but can't point us to any aspect in the report that is not suitable for public review. This is making me uncomfortable, and I need advice on how to ensure that the proponent will indeed make the findings of the Oversight Committee available to the public. That's a very interesting question. Off the top of my head, I would think it would be interesting to try to understand why they are uncomfortable. I know that initially people are quite often uncomfortable with the notion of public access and oversight. I think it also depends also on what the mandate of the Oversight Committee is, whether it is only to report to the organization, or whether there is a mandate about making it public. I would simply say that it is, if the organization is really committed, or the project committee is really committed to making working on the TAPA principles, that utter transparency is absolutely critical, and that is only in the benefits of the project, not in the disbenefits. Right, let me just see if there are any other questions that I should be responding to. Can you say a little bit more on how you arrive at the estimates of corruption in the sector? Do you have a sense of trends over time as well? Well, that's an enormous challenge. We did a piece of work supported by the IADB in Latin America, and we worked with Haley Fonseca and his team, who are kind of data geeks, who did some analysis around what they were seeing around costs of projects, etc., in Latin America. What the easiest answer to that is for us to post the link to that particular study so that you can have a look at it and can actually read up about it. We have no sense of trends over time because this is not a piece of work that has been done in the water and sanitation sector over time. So we don't have the trends for the water and sanitation sector, and we have very limited studies. What we can say is that globally, corruption remains an absolute challenge. And certainly during the COVID pandemic, corruption in many areas increased. And so it's not going away it's not going away. Our struggle is to make sure that we reduce the risks and manage it as best we can. I think I may well be out of time. Claire, do I have any time left for other questions, or should we move on to the panel discussion at this stage? I think we will try to answer the rest of the questions in writing. And I think I will hand over to Jane Nabunya at this point for her to take things, open up the panel discussion. We've got some really exciting speakers. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Barbara. Just to confirm, can you hear me? Great. Yes. Thank you, Barbara. We get into another stage, another session where we'll have a panel discussion, and we've lined up very, very good, excellent colleagues who will take us through this. And the panel will specifically focus on specific challenges or key recommendations. The panelists have read the WIGO 3 report. The panelists have listened to Sanjay, but they've also listened to Barbara, just like all of us. And without wasting time, I will introduce the panelists. And as introduced by Barbara, I am Jane Nabunya, and I'm the country director for IRC in Uganda. Our first panelist is Saroj Kumar Jha. And Saroj is the global director for the World Bank Group's Water Global Practice. and he drives the policy direction of the practice and oversees a portfolio of 27 billion in water-related investments. So he's the right person to really talk to us about what Sanjay referred to as, which was very interesting for me, downstream, upstream corruption. We can get that further unpacked. Saroj has been working at the World Bank since 2005 and was previously a senior executive of the government of India and the UN before joining the bank. Our second panelist is my colleague, Catarina Fonseca. Catarina Fonseca is an economist with a doctoral degree in water sciences. She has over 24 years of experience in the water and sanitation sector. She's an associate of IRC, that's why I refer to her as my colleague, and has her own company called Pulsing Tide. Catarina supports institutional and financial assessments and develops sector finance strategies. Catarina, you're welcome. Saroj, you're welcome. Our third panelist is Willis Ombai. Willis Ombai is the CEO of the Water Sector Trust Fund and has been CEO since 2023 and joined the Water Sector Trust Fund from the Water Fund in September 2015, where he was as Chief Manager, Investments and Programs. Willis has over 20 years of experience across the African continent, managing and financing development projects. Our last but not least panelist is David Boyes. David, yes, David, you're welcome. David is the Deputy General Secretary of Public Services International. This is a global trade union federation founded in 1907. Wow, affiliating 700 unions in 160 countries and representing more than 30 million workers. David is a recognized authority in the water and sanitation sector and was a member of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Water and Sanitation, where he helped steer the concept of public-private partnerships. So to our panelists, you are most welcome. You have 5 minutes each, and I request that you stick to the 5 minutes, and you'll share your thoughts on specific challenges or key recommendations. And to the team online, all of us online, kindly use the chat. Put your questions and comments in the chat, which will be relayed to the panelists.
Sorry.
Saroj, Kumar,
Jane,
you have the floor.
Jane, before Saroj starts, one correction. Put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, please.
Oh, in the Q&A. Thank you, Barbara. In the Q&A, please, in the Q&A. And since I also mentioned the chat, so can the team, Claire and the team, check in the chat, because I already made a mistake, to see whether there are already any questions, comments, specifically for the earlier presenters. Saroj, you have the floor. You have your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, Jen, thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's very early in Washington, D.C., where I'm connecting from. I got about 4 o'clock to be part of this. It tells you how excited I am to be part of this. I have been about 2 years in this job heading the World Bank's water agenda, and I've been to about 26 developing countries, mostly in Africa and Asia in the last 18 months. I have talked to hundreds of women who still have to walk miles and miles to fetch water. And in talking to these people in my job, I have realized that the point that many of you made in the previous speakers, Sanjay talked about it, Barbara talked about it, and I find that in the report. Water sector, like many other sectors, have very serious governance challenges. And this is something which has not been adequately talked about. And I remember when I talked about this in the World Water Forum in Bali, where the point I made was that we don't really have a water crisis. We have a water management crisis. A sector which is really not adequately managed, governed, invested, and therefore we have all the challenges that we are essentially talking about. So the focus of water integrity in network on the integrity in the water sector is very welcome from World Bank Group perspective. And that is how I connected with Barbara and the team in Bali. And I was very inspired to know what this network is trying to do, which has been a passion for my life as well. Those of you who followed the COVID-19 vaccine scandal, this was the case in Lebanon, where I was the World Bank Middle East director based in Lebanon, when there was an elite capture or attempt to elite capture the entire COVID-19 vaccine, not following the WHO protocol, which of course, this report also talks about in the case of water. And we've talked about that in the 2 recent reports of the World Bank, both on water for shared prosperity, and the second is a global assessment of the public expenditure review. So I want to mention 3 things which is more forward-looking. We know the problem. I think I want to focus more on the solution. First, World Bank is, of course, the largest investor in water sector in the world. We annually invest about $5 to $7 billion in water. We have a portfolio of about $30 billion in water sector alone. And if you combine all the other related, it will exceed $75–80 billion of financing in the sector. So naturally, we have a very strong interest in ensuring that this money is spent wisely and it is intended for the outcomes that are planned for the projects. So first is what we call transparency in the sector. What we are realizing is that the beneficiaries of the World Bank financing in the countries where we work, they do not really have, first of all, they don't have audited financial statements, and when they have it, they don't disclose it. We are going to ask the recipients of World Bank financing to prepare those audited financial statements and report and disclose these reports. This will be a requirement for us to be able to continue to work with them going forward, because unless we really see what the financial condition is and where, and I think the point Barbara was making, where the money is coming from, how the money is being spent, and I think that is essentially good for the utility, it is good for everyone, and it is important to build the trust, which currently is very low in most of the water organizations and water operators. So that's my first point. The second is, we are not just going to make it a condition, we are also going to help utilities and governments to be able to prepare such statements. What I call basically systems change, which encourages essentially all the relevant actors in the water sector to be able to do their job when it comes to all the tools and good practices that Sanjay talked about, that Barbara talked about, and the report goes into a lot of details in many countries. So we want to be offering solutions to these countries. And I think this report provides many good pathways that the countries can implement, and we want to include them in the programs that we are financing in the country. And that brings to me the last and important point before I finish my time, is what I call moving away from a culture of financing goods and services to financing outcomes. So I think what is important is that we want to disburse our funds only when we see the results on the ground. So the point Sanjay was making, that the $100 billion project, and then you see nothing happening in the school in terms of textbooks and teaching, that's not basically the way we want to function now. If we are providing financing for water sector, we want to see number of people connected to the water supply network, whether it is a large network or a decentralized network. When people start receiving good quality water in their houses, that is when we will disburse our funds. So what is called the performance-based programs, where we are essentially disbursing against results. And this will also eliminate a lot of this leakages and wastage that happens in the use of public funds. And we believe that what we call program for results, which is essentially now the main instrument we are using for the water sector, will address some of the challenges we have in the sector. But this is also an invitation to all of you to really work with us. And we want to reach out to you in these countries to really work together as part of the broader stakeholder engagement that both Sanjay and Barbara have talked about. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you. I didn't want to stop you even when the bell went off, because you were concluding a very important point. Thank you so much. Over to you, Catarina. Catarina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jane. Well, thank you, Win, for having me. Most of all, congratulations. This is a really important and incredibly rich report for the sector. And I loved it. And I appreciate everyone that's put a lot of work into it. So I think I've been looking at the question. So first, I just want to start from my experience of supporting country finance strategies. And a lot of the work, I mean, all of the work of the finance strategies is finding out how much money there is, where it's going. It's a lot of forensic accounting, and how much is being spent in the sector. And this is all government-led. We have letters of agreement with very top officials to be able to access a lot of this data. So I think I want to give you, and this is not just for governments, it's also for donors, for finance institutions, sort of the top three red lights. The first red light is that there's always a moment in the process of collecting financial data that we the teams working on this, we hit a wall. So there's always a part of the expenditure we cannot get, even though we know it has been done, because we cross-check with other databases, so we know there has been specific loans, specific grants, and we can't find where in the government budgets or institutions that loan or grant comes in. I can also tell you, I thought this was random, but there's a pattern going on here. It usually happens with the sanitation subsector in urban areas. You can take note. The second red light, it's also to be able to track very specific taxes at municipal level. So there's a lot of countries that have, for instance, there's 5% of allocated budgets to municipalities that need to go into the water sector. And sometimes we find justifications that this 5% taxes are spent in other sectors, but it's not very clear, and it's murky and it kind of disappears. So that's the second red light. And I think the third one, which is easier to do when you don't have a lot of data, you can do it with little data and a couple of assumptions, is when you have persistent infrastructure failure with massive amounts of increase in budgets. And this cannot be explained by population growth. Trust me, it's just too much money. You start seeing, persistent infrastructure failure, even with non-revenue water programs and huge amounts of finance coming in. It just doesn't match. And this is where, for instance, what Saroj mentioned on performance-based finance is really important, because you're matching the finance with the service delivery. So the general auditor reports just give you the money. It doesn't give you the money against what kind of service improvements we are getting. So this is the first thing: match the money with evolution of service delivery, and you will find where some of the integrity issues are. And in a lot of the finance strategies, it's no surprise that the area that gives you a lot of money is improving efficiencies. And some of these efficiencies can be technical, some of it can be poor management, lack of maintenance, but yes, a part of it is due to corruption, and they do cost a lot of money, and that's money that could revert to the sector. Now, looking at the chat, I wanted to talk a little bit about repayable finance, because repayable finance is looking at the accountability also from the donor side, from the private sector side. And this is actually more of a plea. It is really important for the finance institutions, public, private, blended facilities, to really report on their loans to the sector, the cost of capital, and also the conditions under which these loans are being done. Because, the report does go into the Kenya example of how difficult it is to track all of the companies involved in these transactions. And again, loans contribute to the debt of the country. Recent Reuters reports examine climate finance. It shows how actually most of the climate financing are highly commercial, expensive loans to low and middle income countries. with a lot of conditions that require that the indebted countries purchase materials and technical assistance from the lending high-income country. So in countries that borrow more, then you don't have enough budgets to spend on the water and sanitation sector. So it's important that the loans are concessional, cheap, and untied. Last sentence. I think we cannot normalize financial extraction. I go back to what Barbara was talking at the start, especially in development finance. This is development finance. It cannot be promoting financial extraction and making these transactions transparent, at least to give the possibility for civil society and the regulators to hold governments and companies accountable. Over.
Thank you. Thank you, Catarina. Sorry. Over to you, Willis.
Let me start by thanking you for giving us this opportunity as Water Sector Trust Fund to give some of the experiences of a national institution here in Kenya, which might really cut across some of the perspectives that have been given by my predecessors in these presentations. Could you go to the next slide? Water Sector Trust Fund is an institution of the Kenya government, which is involved in resource mobilization, financing, and also research, and as well as building capacity of implementing partners. And we have several partners. I'm glad World Bank is represented here. And already, Saroj, we are practicing the performance-based grant or P4R projects. We are currently implementing 2 of those programs. And we have, as a fund, fiduciary risk management and responsibility for the resources mobilized. Basically, so that at least the resources which have been gotten from different development partners realize value for money for which they have been mobilized. Could we go to the second slide, please? So just to highlight some of the challenges, which again have been largely captured in the report, is that number one, we have some of these governance challenges, and the governance challenges are largely witnessed in the entities that we work with. Those are the water service providers, other national institutions, and even some of the CBOs and the INGOs that we support. There are issues of capacity of the implementing partners, which are very key in terms of the implementation, because if the capacity is not there, then you are also likely, in addition to integrity issue, find that some of those projects cannot be done very well. A key element, which is always there in most of these and largely highlighted in the report, is the procurement issues, both at the downstream mainly, but also at the IP, which serve to derail even the time period for implementation of the project. There are sustainability issues of the funded projects, whether they will continue to give the benefits that they are established for, but also sustainability of those projects. Then there are issues of economic trends and financial environments and projects which we fund. There's a challenge with the inflation and the macro economic environment that is at the national institution. As the national government, what determines the cost of various materials that we support for the projects. Among the development partners, there was also change of cooperation strategies and priorities that affect the projects that we do. I'm glad also climate change issues have been mentioned, but we also have come up with the various issues of how we can go through that. security situations. In most of the places that we work in, there are security incidences, but we also have the security management plans that are used to counter and make sure that these are possibilities for continuation because service delivery is required anywhere, everywhere. Health and safety, we know the social and environmental safeguards. We also have to follow those. Please, the next slide. So how are we tackling? A few of those have been able to highlight. So we have come up as an institution to make sure that we continue financing, to have a county engagement strategy, because Water Sector Trust Fund is a financing institution. So we finance largely county entities. We have two systems of government, the national government and the county government, and the institutions that we support are largely county government based. We have a robust risk management policy and frameworks that entails the most common risk, political risk, and that is where we have cases of procurements and their challenges in terms of the political class and potential rent seeking take place. So there have also been mitigating measures which we have documented in the risk management policy and framework. In terms of project appraisal, because this is also important in forestalling integrity issue, mainly at the upstream level, we have tools such as governance assessment tool, integrity assessment toolbox, and project appraisal tool. These are able to support us in terms of forestalling some of those practices which undermine the service delivery or financing of projects. At the ground level, where the projects are undertaken, we have engagement of quality assurance monitors who help us at every milestone to confirm that these projects have been undertaken, and before the payments are done, interim payment certificates are issued, which are witnessed by these consultants. We have continuous capacity building and enhancement of the staff here at our headquarters, but also at the implementing level. We have statutory audits, which is very important, and also other external partners. I want to agree with Saroj that this is a very important component, and we make sure that these are also forming part of the appraisal before we support these projects that I've mentioned. We have also some level of enhanced engagement with stakeholders, both at the national level and also at the county level. I think that brings me closely to the end, and thank everyone for taking time to listen to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Willis. Thank you very much. We've listened to Saroj, public financial management aspects, Catarina, several strategies and costs of financing and some red lights, and Willis specifically from a government institution on opportunities and what they are doing about addressing the challenges. And now over to you, David Boyce, giving us a public sector perspective, public sector work and new dynamics. What is happening in the public service space and the institution that you are leading, Public Services International. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Jane. Also, I add my thanks to Barbara for the excellent report and presentation. Thanks to the WIN team. Tons of information and challenges and solid recommendations for actions at all levels of society. Sanjay also provided some option and improving our democratic institutions, again, at all levels of governments, from international government institutions to national, state, and local. Integrity is the key pillar for all SDGs and for our future. Jane introduced PSI. Let me say that many of our members in public service work with very low wages, little training, poor and outdated tools, and often in very difficult situations, especially in the sanitation sector. I've been working in water for more than 20 years, 25 years, in fact. When I started, the World Bank was heavily pushing privatization, public-private partnerships, long-term concession contracts, as was the French government in favor of their two private water giants, companies with billions in annual income, enough to buy politicians, influence laws and regulations, pay bribes to mayor, ensure the revolving door between politicians and regulators and the companies. What we notice from our membership is that when water systems are taken by for-profit companies, it's greed that takes over. Greed of senior managers in the private companies whose salaries and bonuses are reaching outrageous amounts. Greed of local managers whose payouts strip those of comparable positions in public service. Greed of investment managers and shareholders who insist on ever-growing dividends. In the UK, senior managers of the public utilities supported Thatcher's privatization, in part because they knew that they could massively increase their salaries. This we saw. And they were right. Their salaries are now in the millions. Now, given that we're in almost every workplace, we see the games played by the for-profit sector. Well, one of the things they do when they come in is they lay off half the staff or more and then rehire them through labor brokers on precarious contracts. This is in part to break the unions and to cut the cost of wages, which is a burden if your goal is to maximize profits. We see vertically integrated companies engaging in dubious internal practices, for example, selling off outdated equipment to far-flung subsidiaries at inflated prices. And we see constant manipulation of procurement processes, contract bidding and secrecy, bribery, tax evasion, gaming the regulators, and using undue political influence. We definitely need strong whistleblower protection for workers who dare to report such behaviors, whether from public or private agents. The cost to them when they do this is they lose their job and their lives are threatened. So regrettably, integrity plays a minor role in profit maximization. Now, we're in the post-COVID period. Many governments are totally strapped for cash. Yet the IMF is imposing austerity measures, structural adjustment, which normally requires cutting public spending and driving privatization. And the World Bank continues to support privatization. So privatization will continue. And the new approach, financialization, blending finances, handing over our water utilities and water resources to giant private equity firms which specialize in extracting capital from their assets, and which are the least transparent and accountable of all. In many countries, the move to privatize is not to improve services, but is a form of accounting fraud to get government spending and borrowing off its books. Now, some of the initiatives that PSI supports, which should help tackle integrity in WATSAN, is the concept of public-to-public partnerships, where strong public water and sanitation utilities help weaker ones. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan agreed with this approach and mandated UN Habitat to support it. The main focus of these partnerships is to help train and skill up staff so they can meet the needs of people and planet. Peer-to-peer partnerships are one important tool that is largely ignored in favor of false hopes that the private sector will step in and solve difficult problems. Now, Jane misspoke in the introduction saying I supported public-private partnerships, probably because the public-to-public approach does not enjoy the support enjoyed by the private sector. The World Bank doesn't support this approach. The regional development banks don't either, possibly because these types of partnerships don't move tons of money, which is the core work of the banks. My final point, another trend that is accelerating, is remunicipalization, where services are taken back in public hands, ending or not renewing private concession contracts. And public management allows the creation of democratic oversight of the utilities, where a cross-section of groups in the community can have a real and systematic structural voice in decision-making. I think they both are legitimate policies that deserve support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And it's good you've referred to the public, because when I first saw that, I was like, is there a mistake? Have they left out the private? So you notice that I inserted the private. Now I understand why it is public. So thank you so much. Thank you very much. Now we have 25 minutes. Quite a number of questions have come in the Q&A space.
Can I?
Oh, yes, Saroj, you have something to say?
Yeah, I just need 30 seconds to clarify what was said by the previous speaker about the World Bank stand. And I stand to disagree with what was said by the previous speaker about the World Bank, that we are essentially here for privatization of the water supply systems. That is incorrect. The World Bank essentially stands for water security for poor and vulnerable people. And the ways of delivering those services will involve strong partnership of people, public sector organizations, and private sector as well, where they can bring their expertise, innovation, and where possible, also capital, which is very much needed in this sector. So I wanted to clarify that. Back to you.
Thank you, Saroj, for the clarification. As I was saying, yes, quite a number of questions, but also comments in the chat. And for the panelists, please get into the Q&A section and try to also respond to some of the questions there in writing. I'll start with Catarina. Catarina, you've already responded to one of the questions. Probably you want to speak to it, to respond to it.
Which one? I have the chat. I have the Q&A. Give me a second. I have to go back.
The
one of Mary.
Yes.
Okay. So Mary had asked, can you expand a little on your comment on the challenge around sanitation finance in urban areas, and what you think might be a good way of responding? So my answer was, so in my work, I'm finding it very difficult to do three things. So one is to see which institutions and budget lines are actually the recipients of these loans and grants for urban sanitation. And I can add that it's mostly in Asia, because a lot of the finance institutions in Asia do not report to the mandatory reporting or voluntary reporting mechanisms that a lot of the American and European and African institutions report to. So it's very hard to triangulate where these budgets are coming in. Then matching the budget and expenditure with the outcomes in urban sanitation. So it's hard. So if it says, oh, we have money to build 3 water treatment plants, and actually there's only one functioning, and the other 2, the waste doesn't even get to the wastewater treatment plant. So it's this matching of budgets with what is actually on the ground. And the third one is figuring out the cost of capital. How much is this loan actually costing, both in terms of the financial cost and everything that comes attached with technical assistance and technologies that needs to be brought sometimes from very expensive country donors. How do you react to it? And I think the report has many different ways of what to do about this, depending on where you're working. So I'm going to speak just about the level of influence of civil society, global civil society, researchers, consultants. And the only thing we can do is to hold up the mirror, is to try to make as much of the information public as possible, is to push for for making at least the report available somewhere online. With the colleague that also was saying in the Q&A, what do I do? You just push and push and push for reports to be online. It's the holding up the mirror. It's up to the government institutions, to the civil society, where they have the space in the countries, to hold down the institutions accountable. But just that act of holding up the mirror, of showing which information is there, which one is not there, where is the mismatch, just that in itself is very, very powerful. And it's taken forward in country. I mean, that's not up to us to do anything with. Over to you.
Thank you, Catarina. Thank you for that. There is an interesting, fascinating question for you, Saroj.
Yes,
chat.
Yes, thank you, Jen. So I picked up two questions from the chat. One from Wilson and the other from Ruth. Both are somewhat related. So first, let me explain how the program for results, what we call short form P for R, really works. And the question essentially was, if the World Bank disburses funds after the results are achieved, who invests the funds first to show those results? Of course, it is the government, which has to really provide for resources in their budget, undertake those activities, deliver the results, and then get it reimbursed by the bank. But there are situations where the government may not have adequate resources to start the program. So in those cases, our program for results guidelines allow us to provide up to 25% advance to the governments to really start working, which is then adjusted against the results to be verified. The verification of results is an important part of the program for results. It is done by an independent verification agency hired through a competitive process. It could be an NGO, it could be a firm, and it could be a confederation of different bodies. But we can have more than one independent verification agencies to verify the results, but it is not government. So when the governments claim disbursement for the results they have achieved in the program, there's an independent agency which is hired locally to essentially to be able to help do the verification work. So I hope that answers your question. In exceptional cases like during COVID-19, we allowed governments to have more advanced resources to be able to begin the work. But generally, we would expect the governments to put it as a priority and start the program and then claim reimbursements from the World Bank. The related question is on comparison between IPF versus P4R in a way. And just for the benefit of everyone, so we have basically three broad instruments of the World Bank. One is a budget support operation, what we call development policy, which is when the governments undertake major policy reforms in a sector or the macro level. We provide certain additional resources because that involves adjustment of the revenue and expenditure as a result of those macro reforms. And that comes from the development policy financing. The second is the investment project financing, which is our traditional instrument when we did that, where we used to finance procurement of goods, services, and so on and so forth, which is called IPF. And third is the program for results that I mentioned today. Our experience has been that the investment project financing type of instruments, where we are financing procurement of goods and services, actually doesn't really create adequate incentive for government, for the borrowers, to really focus more on the outcomes and the results, which is why we are providing the financing. And often that process of contracting procurement is a very problematic process in the way that is undertaken in many countries. So our experience increasingly is that when we focus on financing against performance, against results, against outcomes, there is a strong incentive for everyone to focus on that and make their system work in a way that guarantees delivery of the outcomes against which the disbursements will be made. We have taken independent evaluation of our both IPF and P4R instruments, and increasingly we find that the P4R is a very attractive instrument for everyone, for the governments, because they are able to show results, and also they are able to eliminate some of the corruption and corrupt practices that goes on in the system, which is highlighted in the report, throughout the report. Over.
Thank you, Saroj. Thank you for responding to those questions. Willis and David, you have quite some questions in the Q&A, but I'd like to point Yeah, Willis. Willis, there is a question. Have you any examples of where your members have worked with civil society to address challenges of integrity and corruption in service provision? Kindly share. Willis?
Yes, thank you so much, Jane and Tim. Apologies, our CEO has been called to a meeting with the peers, but I'm here with our General Manager for Internal Audit and Risk, and I am the General Manager for Fund Development at the Water Sector Trust Fund. My name is Ruth Nanga. So we can answer some of these questions. So for the question that you just asked very specifically about how we have worked with the civil society to address this issue, Water Sector Trust Fund indeed works with the civil society water and sanitation network in Kenya, KEWASNet. And we have worked together also literally with WIN to develop those tools for accountability and governance issues, as the CEO explained. We do have actually civil society implementing some of our programs, especially in the northern part of Kenya, where they're supporting the utilities and other institutions who don't have enough capacity to do implementation, but very specifically in terms of the integrity tools. And I think in this one, I can let our internal audit manager to respond because he's directly involved in this process.
30 seconds, please.
Yeah, thank you.
We are running out of time.
Thank you. My name is Edwin Korir. I work with Willis. So there is a question which has been asked by regarding how do we tackle corruption within the downstream. So what we normally do, the key activities we do is we do internal audit, we do external audit, we do monitoring, and all the implementing partners which we fund, they sign what we call code of conduct, which stipulates areas which has to be followed up to minimize incidents of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David, you have many questions, but I'll direct you to one specifically. Your thoughts on workers' rights?
Okay.
It has, yeah.
Thanks.
The others are very exciting, but this one is exciting.
Thanks. Look, I mentioned at the outset that many of our members work with very low wages, poor conditions, lousy tools. I didn't mention that oftentimes management is not exactly good because we don't represent managers, we represent workers. And so in public institutions, the managers can need more professionalism. But look, basically, if you're working 8 hours a day and you're not earning enough to feed your family, you will then have trouble at home. And so, you know, we talk about these bribes being collected at the point of tariffs being paid. What I know from my experience is it's not about enriching people, it's about making ends meet. Many of our members who work in water utilities don't even have water at home. And because they just don't earn enough to be in those neighborhoods that are lucky enough to be served, whether by the public and the private. But if I can also say, because, and if I have a minute or more, Barbara asked in the chat, Barbara, not in the Q&A, how we have helped work with community as workers. We know the inside operations. And so when we build coalitions in the community or join coalitions, we can explain the internal operations in the company, again, whether public or private, operations on a daily basis so people in the community can know the challenges we face. And then also to help understand that water actually is political. It's not just about management. It's not just about finance. It's political decisions made by elected leaders at a lot of levels. And if the people don't organize to put political pressure to ensure that the needs of people on planet aren't met, then we will continue to miss the SDGs. And this is the whole thing about the shrinking democratic space. We've got to expand it. But again, I'm more than happy to respond to any bilateral questions that come later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To the panelists, you'll get into the Q&A or the chat and kindly respond to the questions there. We are moving to the last part of this great discussion. I'll give 1 minute to each of you. What's your take home? What is in the basket? 1 minute for each. I'll start with Saroj. Please, 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. No, it's been a fascinating conversation and lots of takeaways from me, and also I had read the report, so some good ideas. One, I just wanted to flag that we just completed the first ever public expenditure review of the water sector. And that report was published 2 weeks before the World Water Forum, which is referred to also by this report, WIGO. As a follow-up to that, we are going to establish a public expenditure review dashboard, which will provide real-time data on budgetary allocations for water sector. Now, water is very fragmented in most countries. Very hard to collect data on water. Is not just wash. There is so much outside that wash space also happening. But we are going to make an effort to try to put all that data in one place. I think it's an important public good, which would make sure that people have access to that information. The second point I wanted to make is that what we call the utilities of future. We need smart organizations in the water sector which has the capacity to do the analysis, do the reports, disclose those information, have strong stakeholder engagement, use data and machine learning essentially to drive the process of transparency that we've talked about. And as a result of this, we want to integrate that thinking in the utilities of future program of the World Bank, which essentially look at some of these new ideas that we're discussing here today. And the last point I wanted to make is that many of you asked good examples of what these programs might look like. And I would strongly recommend to look at the Tanzania Sustainable Rural Water Supply and Sanitation Program. There are many such programs which have delivered excellent results, but Tanzania is an example that you may want to look at. But thank you very much. Okay. It's been wonderful being on this panel with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Saroj. Thank you very much. Catarina, your 1 minute takeaway.
Less than that. I think I go back to, I'm an economist, so I like value for money. I mean, I see a lot of donors also on the panel, on the attendees list. Your biggest value for money, it costs very, very little, but I think in terms of outcome of reduced corruption, higher integrity, and higher money for the sector, it is to work and train civil society on going through the full budget cycle and all the points that are in the reports, so they can hold governments and donors accountable. I think this is one of the most powerful and value for money aspects that can be done to address corruption and integrity. Over.
Thank you. Thank you, Catarina. Some words where some of us come from: corruption, greed, layoffs, bribing, downstream, upstream. Very interesting terminologies. Willis, or the representative?
Yeah, thank you.
Trust fund.
Thank you. On behalf of Willis, as I said, he has been called by the cabinet secretary for an urgent meeting. So our take home as trust fund is that as an institution which is relying heavily on funds from development partners, we still have to enhance issues of integrity, transparency, and accountability. And as you said, right from us at trust fund level, at the implementing partners level, and also at the county level. So this will enable us now to continue receiving the resources from the development partners. And our take home also from the message from the World Bank is that we are moving away to performance-based. So we are prepared as a fund to move in that direction, to be able to enable our beneficiaries to put in place measures, to put in place transparency. And as the World Bank had also said, Saroj had said, we insist on getting audited financial statement so that we know how the money is being utilized and how the outcome of the resources we fund these particular implementing partners. Lastly, is to thank Win for this wonderful report. We'll be able to look at it and internalize and put in place measures within Trust Fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David, your 1 minute take. David, you are muted.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Bullet points. Global tax reform. Global debt workout for developing countries. Meet ODA promises. Meet climate finance promises. Analyze the real contribution of private finance to the sector in countries and cities most in need. Development bank support for public-public partnerships. National development banks step up support to public utilities. And finally, respect worker rights, pay decent wages, ensure safe working conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you so much. We have come to the end of this great discussion. It's WIG 4, WIG 3. We had WIG 1, WIG 2, WIG 3. Things get more complicated as we wiggle, but these are things that we need to also look at, discuss in the countries, globally, and everywhere. So what happens after this discussion? Thank you, Win, for organizing this. And Win is still available and around to take this forward. The discussion, as I said, is just starting. And the WIGO is aimed to bring change in the way we do things so that we can eventually minimize use of words like greed, embezzlement, bribe, corruption, and all that stuff, and ensure efficiencies and ensure, worse service delivery. So we will continue as WIN to spearhead the follow-ups on specific actions and recommendations by the different stakeholders in the water and sanitation sector. It's very important for WIN that the actions don't just remain in WIGO 3. They should get out and get a life and acted upon, because these are challenges that have been identified. So call for translation to action, documenting all this evidence, because sometimes the evidence is there, but it's stuck somewhere, and the people who are supposed to pay are not being, they don't know what is happening, or they just ignore that. WIN will continue to organize sessions around the WIGO recommendations for action. So this is the first in a series of sessions and discussions to take this forward, to move it out of the report and take it to where it should be seen, it should be addressed, and it should be and actions taken. A recording, a summary, and a recording of this particular discussion will be accessible. It will be shared as soon as it is organized and put together. And as a group, at the peak of this discussion, we had over 160 participants online, which is great. But the last point from us as WIN is to make sure that we connect. We connect corruption, bribery, greed, and all that stuff and all the terminologies to the right to water and sanitation. Everybody deserves a chance to really access quality, quantity, affordable waste services. And if there are any impediments in there through corruption, through bribery, that means we are preventing that right to be not only acknowledged, but accessed. So I thank you very much on behalf of the WIN board, on behalf of the WIN team, Barbara and your team that put all this together. The full report, WIGO 3, was shared in the chat, but it's fully accessible. If you want to access it, the WIN team is available to link you to where you can access it. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the discussion. Keep the questions and comments coming. Send them to Win. The team is available to look at them. So I thank you so much. It was great moderating this session. I loved every bit of it, and I thank you for being part of it. Thank you very much.